Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the fourth episode of our podcast, Human Blockchain Explorers. Today we have Aaron Schutza. He is the Director of Research at Topple. Aaron, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I have to say I got caught up on the 5 parts of the Taktikos research presentation you've been giving for the past. I think it's extended over a couple of months. So
Several months,
that's
yeah.
what several months. So I think that's what we want to dive into today. And there's plenty to talk about. And I'm going to encourage all of the listeners to get there over at the Topple YouTube channel and make sure that they check that out, because it was everything that I've kind of wanted to, everything that you want to know to go deeper on protocol development and consensus. And it goes from top to bottom and bottom back up, introduction all the way through to the deep quantitative research. So first of all, congratulations on putting that out there. And
Thank you.
and we're gonna get into it. So first, let's start with a background on Topple. We did speak with James Amon, the CTO of Topple, and there's more information about Topple there. I just wanted to bring viewers up to speed about Topple again, so that they have a bit of background and context here. Then we'll go into your story. I'm going to try and recap Taktikos to you, and then you can tell me where we need to spend a little more time.
Sure.
Then we'll dive deep and then round it out with a couple additional questions, personal things that might give the viewers some more information about you, and wrap it up from there. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Great. All right. So I'm going to give you a little bit of what Topple is, and then we'll go from there. So Topple is, for everyone listening, is a blockchain protocol built to drive sustainable and inclusive growth. Some of the main core values are, we want positive impact from individuals, entities, governments, but also there's a kind of a rejection that the current state of inequity, exclusion, and injustice, what the current state of the environment is. Topple seems to take an opinion on that, and that the current socio-financial systems no longer serve us. And so along with the belief in an urgent attention to the climate crisis, can we build a framework that delivers people all of these things in a technically sound way? So if that's Topple to me and what I've taken away, what is Topple to you, Aaron?
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself. I feel like Topple is an impact-centric ecosystem where we're using proof of stake as a technology, as a platform to enable impact and to build good in this world, to build a product that helps people and improves the kind of social impact that we all want to get out of this kind of platform. I've been with Topple since 2019. I was driven by the kind of prospect of the technology and kind of joining this organization. My goals were to try and improve the world in some way with my efforts. And I feel that mission driven alignment that we've all had has fostered a really interesting and unique group of people that all have this kind of shared goal. So that's been my experience with it. And I've been so focused kind of on the technology aspect of it that sometimes I feel like a bit decoupled from that dream, that vision. But I'd like to say that we have a dedicated team of business development.
I've interacted with a bunch of people from your team. There is definitely the high quality technical side and high quality growth business development side. So I've been lucky to see both of it. both sides and everything in between. So I can imagine when heads down research is what you're focused on, like coming up for you're coming up for air, and it's like, all right, what's going on out here? Let's go back down. And I think you're building towards the launch of Taktikos, which is
Yeah,
in 250 plus days. I think James may have mentioned.
right. We're going for the token generation event in November, I believe.
Exciting,
So that'll
awesome.
be the launch of our platform, our new consensus mechanism.
So that's topple to me. That's topple to you. Just before we get into the kind of 5-part Tacticos deep dive, I'd just like to know, you said that you joined Topple in 2019. What were you
Mm-hmm.
doing leading up to then? What was your story background before then?
Well, I was doing numerical modeling into physics in academia, and I became kind of disillusioned with academia in general, and decided to join a startup because it represented kind of a new field of research. And my task at the time was to understand the new Ouroboros protocol. And that got me to dive into the research side of things. And I just went deeper and deeper and ended up uh, kind of really falling in love with this new frontier of research. So the path that I took, I've kind of applied my numerical modeling skills to this field of research by doing predictive analysis. And the sort of methodology I use is in physics carries over quite well. I'm a numerical modeler. I like to think about making predictions with models, and so I can apply that skill set. So it was a pretty nice fit. But the rigorous analytical kind of definitions and proofs of the security of these protocols calls for numerical analysis and numerical research as well, because we want to make quantitative predictions about the security properties. And those security properties correspond to the health of the network and all the vulnerabilities that the network has to adversarial attack. Um, so my role at Topple's been kind of singular in that respect. It's been quite a journey to learn all these new things, but my background in physics has been tremendously helpful, and it's been pretty exhilarating working with a startup. It's very dynamic, and you find your role and specialize in that, and yeah. So that's been my startup experience.
Did you meet the team through Rice University?
Yeah,
Is that,
yeah.
yeah?
I've known James since 2012, I think. So James introduced me to Topple.
Gotcha. Um, Great. That's super helpful for context, background. Just there's this trend of physicists, blockchain. I'm trying to put my finger on what that pattern is, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, physics obviously is generally applicable to many places. So I'm not that surprised. But anyway, there does seem to be a large correlation between physics and blockchain research or blockchain development. So I find that people are very interesting, or at least the work that they're doing is very interesting.
Hmm.
So, okay, in order for us to dive into Tacticos, I would like us to first label what the 5 parts are so that we can kind of I in my head I have them as 5 parts and I might be able to label them, but if you could, what would you say parts 1 through 5 in 1 or 2 words, like a phrase, are, so that we can, easily jump between the conversation to those different parts?
Yeah. So part one, I would say, was um, just an introduction to blockchain in general and the overlap between proof of work and proof of stake systems, and really the design principles in proof of stake, at least in this kind of what's called Nakamoto style proof of stake. There's a lot of carryover between the two paradigms. Um, so modern proof of stake systems that use probabilistic consensus mechanisms, um, they have blocks they have chains, they have chain selection rules. It's basically the same principle of, you know, participants wanting to be the most up to date, and that means they have to have the longest ledger, the longest history of events, and that translates into the longest chain. Um, so that principle, that kind of longest chain rule, drives the honest participants to synchronize. Right? They always synchronize on a longest chain, and the adversary is always trying to manipulate that and bias it in some way, to get either an advantage or to fool the network into believing some alternate history. So those principles kind of set the landscape for the security model that has to be devised and invented to actually make the predictions about what power an adversary would have over a network that's executing these probabilistic consensus algorithms. And so the first part I kind of focus on, and let me see.
Well, so you're front running me a little bit. I'm
I
just
see.
trying to label so part one is introduction to blockchain, proof of
Mm-hmm.
work, proof of stake. Part two uh is I what I took away was kind of difficulty curve. And
Yes.
you know, there's a lot more there. But part three was maybe costless simulation. Um
Right.
part four, I have network delay. Part five is block settlement. Those may not be right, but just for us to bounce around, because I'm not sure that my question is going to land sequentially in part one to two
Sure.
to
Sure.
three. Um, what would you say is the labels? Are those accurate labels for part two through five?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, and part one focuses on the introductory framework, and then I go straight into the modification of Taktikos. So to set the context, Taktikos is a modification of underlying protocol of Ouroboros prowess. So we kind of inherit a lot of the security properties of that protocol, and we have to make a modification to the security model to actually make predictions with it. So that's what I talk about in that part two. And then we go into, you know, network delay and grinding attacks, and you know, what how we actually make predictions about the block settlement in a given time, in a given time frame. There's different measures of block settlement that, one is like time based, one is block based. Block based settlement is more reliable in my opinion, just quantitatively. It gives you better bounds. And yeah, so those are some of the topics that are covered in the later talks. It's a lot of content to kind of
Oh yeah,
sift through. So
yeah, and you know, I don't want to do an injustice of being brief about it, but I think there are the key things that maybe we can just touch on at a high level that brings us through. And people, because there could be researchers here in the crowd that are interested to dive into a more specific point of those conversations, or in the discussion that you and James and Hans have afterwards.
okay,
And in order to bring a bit more awareness to the research that you're doing, I think if we give the high level all the way through, then people will be able to find it more easily. And I think you guys are interested in getting peer review feedback. Who
yes,
else is doing this kind of thing?
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Two quick questions. Maybe they're not quick, but why is it called Taktikos? Where does that come from? Do you know?
It's a Greek name. It stands for stability, or kind of regular, uh, a regularized kind of ordering of events, or especially in the context of war, tactics, like tactics. So it's kind of, I think, where the word tactics is derived from. Um, and Tacticos is kind of a natural fit because we're applying this modification in order to make the block intervals more regular and to make them kind of more steady. So it's that steadying effect that the namesake comes from.
Love it. And then can you just can you give us a kind of brief history lesson of where Ouroboros and Ouroboros Praus comes from?
Yeah, Ouroboros and Ouroboros Praus were developed by and introduced by IOHK and now IOG. Um, the research group there has um, just a litany of papers that have come forward in the last couple of years relating to this. But there's a paper that is really foundational and I think kind of goes under the radar because it's not as well known. It's called the Combinatorics of Longest Chain Rule. And what they do in that paper is introduce a framework for understanding the power of this adversary to kind of fork the network in a variety of different ways. So they introduced this framework called forkable strings analysis, which all of these proofs are kind of based on. So understanding these protocols in that context allows us to make predictions and like bound the kind of power of the adversary when you're when you're considering things like network delay, um, how much stake they control over the network, and it's predicated on a ability of the adversary to predict when they're eligible. And eligible means they can make a blockchain extension at a given time or a given round. Um, so this uh, security proof framework has been kind of ported to different security settings. And when Ouroboros was first put forward, I believe in 2017, there's been follow-up papers like Ouroboros Praus, Ouroboros Genesis, Ouroboros Chronos that each port this security framework into different security settings. Um, so, for instance, Praus lifted this analysis to the semi-synchronous setting. The semi-synchronous setting is a setting where participants synchronize in a bounded number of rounds, and we kind of quantify that and limit the power of the adversary to delay messages with that bound. So it's a very popular model that's used in all of these security frameworks, and it's kind of standard since we're dealing with distributed systems that have to wait to synchronize and download blocks. But it's also a delaying adversary that has power to manipulate the order of delivery of messages and things like that. But they can't mutate the messages because they're constrained by the crypto primitives that kind of constrain the blocks from being reforged or reminted.
Good.
So so that's kind of an overarching theme in the research field. I was just considering simplified models and then adding complexity to them over time, and that's kind of what we're doing with Taktikos as well. We're taking a simple approach, which has been well established and well researched, and then adding some complexity to it, adding some parameters to it, and coming up with a security model to reflect that. And if you think of a security model as being like a model with a set of inputs and outputs, the output would be like the prediction of how fast blocks settle, how much power an adversary has. And the inputs are the parameters that you run the protocol with, for instance. But some parameters are simply just part of the security model and not even a part of the protocol itself, like this delay parameter I was referencing.
So I want to go backwards a little bit. What you did in part one, the introduction, was you gave us a general framework for understanding how distributed systems propagate, and if there's an adversary, what you need to control for is what my takeaway was. And
Yeah,
that
that's a great way to put
ultimately
it.
got us, okay, then that ultimately got us to, okay, a blockchain is a distributed data storage of an immutable ledger that grows in time. The data is continuously injected into the system in the form of transactions. The transactions are grouped together in things called blocks. Each underlying block has a header that contains cryptographic information used to in the verification process of the protocol. A set of the set of the transactions constitute the block's body. The block's body contains the data that updates the state of the ledger. As each block is added in time, we call that an extension, and the blocks update the ledger. And a block always references a parent block, which forms a linked list. And each block has its own unique identifier, but always references a parent block. That leaves us where, and what is the next step in understanding the piece that leads us to Taktikos?
So the key here is that you have references to parent blocks, right? Each block references a parent. And then there's some time interval between the updates. And
why?
We want to, why?
I mean, why is there a time delay?
So in the probabilistic setting, you have no assurance over where and when the next leader eligibility is going to be found. In the proof of work setting,
meaning there's a distributed list, there's a distributed group of participants, and across the network, we can't guarantee that anything is synchronized.
That's true. But in the proof of work setting, it's uniformly random when and where this next leader eligibility is going to come from, because it's derived from this computational race to find a winning cryptographic hash that satisfies a threshold. And that's simply included in the block. And you could devise a way to have other crypto primitives dictate eligibilities, but in the Nakamoto style setting, you have this uniform random process, and that unpredictability gives the protocol resilience because you can't target the next winner, the next block leader. So the issue with early proof of stake systems that didn't rely on this process, that had kind of a deterministic way of deriving the next block leader, is that these block leaders could be targeted, predictively targeted by some adversary. And we call that property global predictability. And this kind of situation isn't beneficial to the protocol because it isn't resilient against what's called adaptive adversaries that actually can target participants. So to make the protocol more resilient, they introduced this mechanism in the Nakamoto style proof of stake where the threshold is based on a private lottery. A private lottery meaning you evaluate your own crypto primitives locally with your own public-private key pair, and then see if you're the winner. And if you're the winner for that round, then you broadcast your block. So what that does is it eliminates the ability of this adversary to predict who's going to be next in line. They can only predict their own eligibilities locally. But that introduces another kind of degree of freedom for the adversary because they can predict when they're going to be eligible in a given round. And keep in mind, we're in a setting where proof of work is in this continuous time race because the evaluation of hashes is very quick. But in proof of stake, time is discretized into rounds, often called slots. And you evaluate, and everybody synchronizes and agrees on what slot is currently transpiring. So this private lottery is evaluated once per round. And if you model it after the same kind of computational puzzle that is executed in the Nakamoto proof of work setting, you get a kind of distribution of time intervals that's similar in both settings. And I'm talking about comparing Prouse and, for instance, Ethereum. So in Ethereum, there's about 13 seconds between blocks in the proof of work Ethereum before they merged or migrated to proof of stake. But it's used kind of as an example of parameters that were close to the edge of security for this system. So this average value of the time between blocks is well understood in both settings. In Bitcoin, it's one block every 10 minutes, right, on average. But there can actually be long stalls between these blocks being updated because you can just have this random process executing and there's no guarantee that you're going to find a block in a given amount of time. You can also have periods where many blocks are found in rapid succession. And this random process induces a distribution of time intervals between the blocks. So you go and you measure, you count how much time is in between each block. You get something that looks like an exponential curve in both settings, in Ouroboros-Prowse, in Ethereum, in the proof of work Ethereum, and in the proof of work setting of Bitcoin. So all of these kind of distributions have something in common, and it's kind of, I think it's referred to as a Poisson process that induces this sort of distribution. So this kind of exponential profile where it peaks at short time intervals and then kind of gradually tapers off as long time intervals as the time intervals get longer. So it's rare that there's long stalls, but they can occur with a given degree of frequency. And it's also more common to have blocks in rapid succession, and that's why you can't just arbitrarily increase the chain growth to improve the throughput, because it just induces these forks all the time. So to kind of carry that over into the Prowse setting, you have discrete time intervals between blocks because every block lies in a slot. And these slots are, discrete in time. We all agree upon how long they last. So, but you still get, because of the properties of this local leadership eligibility test that's, locally predictable leadership test, it's almost like a discrete Poissonian process.
Let's pause for a sec.
Sure.
What you're keying in on here is measuring the kind of the distribution of blocks, or how frequently blocks come in.
Mm-hmm.
In proof of stake, in Ouroboros, the framework for building proof of stake, or a framework for building proof of stake, is that each time is broken into slots,
Yeah.
and they're discrete, and in order to get a holistic view of what the distribution is, so that we can then measure it and make predictions, this is the process that you're doing, and it then gives you the ability to, once we see it, we can then analyze it and begin to manipulate it and simulate it so that we can find the right tuning that we want in order to produce higher throughput along with the same amount or greater security. It's like
Exactly.
you're getting to that depth of, we're at this part of it, we've modeled it, and now we know that we want to do certain things to it.
Mm-hmm. And that's where this difficulty curve comes into play.
Is the difficulty curve the main thing that you want to have your hand on the lever of, because it does what? Is that the right question?
Yeah, it's a way of parameterizing this distribution of time intervals. It's a way of designing the desired time interval distribution that you want out of the protocol.
And that's important because an adversary can begin to build their own private blockchain, or build on top of an honest node, or because we're in this probabilistic proof of stake environment. Is that what you call probabilistic Nakamoto consensus?
Yes.
The adversary has this advantage of building blocks in many different ways to gain an advantage, to either double spend or disrupt the network. And what uh, essentially what you're trying to do is make sure that the adversary is a non-factor without degrading the efficiency, performance, and security of the system.
Yes, it's a way of kind of modifying the adversary's ability to make extensions as well at the same time as the honest participants just follow the rules, right? But the adversary can manipulate the rules to try and bias chain growth in his favor somehow. But if you encode in the protocol as a global setup constraints in chain growth, like for instance, let's limit the number of blocks that can be in rapid succession. Let's say blocks have to be 3 slots apart. You can just enable that as a rule, and no node would adopt a block that was too close apart, for instance. That's a simple way of just spacing out blocks, but it's not necessarily the best design. Um, and then making predictions about the chain growth kind of follows suit. If you make that modification to the protocol, it changes the security properties. So what we want to do is have a general approach where we can design many different rules that correspond to constraining the chain growth of honest participants and also enhancing chain growth of honest participants in a way that enables synchronized parties to make rapid chain growth while desynchronized parties uh, have a reduced rate of chain growth. And the kind of mentality in designing this rule set that plays a role in chain growth is that we want to have synchronized parties have the best outcome, the best throughput. And that's where this snowplow curve kind of was derived from. And the reason we have these parameters kind of introduced in the snowplow curve is because we want a parametric way of deriving security properties. We want to be able to make analytic predictions with these with modifications that we're making. Otherwise, we have to rely on numerical techniques. So having that predictive capability is really important. And among all designs of difficulty curve, the snowplow curve has a unique analytic solution for the distribution of time intervals. And that's something that we leverage in our security proof that we're designing. So that's kind of why we've made that design choice. But the ideas and the principle behind it is that if you can constrain the adversary's chain growth in a way that limits its its power in a private chain attack, you can improve the security and resiliency of the protocol with respect to adversarial attacks. Um, and it's just kind of happens that the shape of the distribution that's introduced by the snowplow curve has better resiliency in the face of a delaying adversary, an adversary that delays messages arbitrarily. And the kind of natural delay that is induced on the network as well. So there's kind of two forms of delay. It's like adversarial reordering of withholding of messages, and then just the natural synchronization delay between honest participants. And in Cardano's case, I think they've begun parameterizing that as 2 slots, for instance, if your slots are 1 second, so 2 seconds. And that's a measured empirical quantity, right? You can't go in and predict what the natural network delay will be in a given day, for instance. You have to measure it over time.
We have some depth of design to do to prevent an adversary from having too much of an advantage or an advantage at all.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because is it in part because we switch from a computationally resource heavy function in proof of work that we don't want to do because we don't think that we need to waste that's like a burdensome process that we don't need to do. And so we can do the same, we can have the same outcomes, the same cryptographic guarantees in a format that doesn't require us to do an unnecessary amount of computation. Is that part of what this conversation is?
Well, that's the motivation for adopting a proof of stake platform in the first place, right? Um, but there's trade offs. There are definitely advantages to using proof of work as a mechanism for consensus. One, you can statelessly check the validity of block headers. Two, it limits the adversary's ability to manipulate and bias chains because they have to focus on one chain at a time. And three, it also eases the analysis in a kind of it's much simpler to analyze this sort of Nakamoto attack, the double spend attack, which was originally identified in the Bitcoin white paper, but then further elucidated in the Bitcoin backbone paper. It's a very famous paper in this field. But the the kind of disadvantage is this slow throughput and this massive energy expenditure to maintain blocks. And proof of stake kind of throws that all out the window, and then at least the variant of proof of stake that we're focused on, it models itself after this kind of hash race and replaces the hash race with a kind of checkpointed, well, not checkpointing means something else, but a kind of round by round test that executes slowly, much more slowly than the computational race of Bitcoin or a Nakamoto style consensus. So from that, you always have to consider the kind of gravest threat of this double spend attack, and it's been shown that that is the most serious threat in that these sort of systems are vulnerable to. And a technique called blockchain partitioning was used in this paper called "Everything is a Race and Nakamoto Always Wins," where they compare a couple of different protocols and see how resilient they are to network delay and adversarial fraction of either computational resources or stake. So when we say resources, it's usually in a context where the security model treats it both proof of stake and proof of work, and we say the resources either apply to computational work or the stake that's allocated on the ledger. So since the kind of ledger is acting as a constraint for the adversary, the ledger has to be designed in such a way that you only have discrete updates to stake and snapshots of stake. And that's where epochs come into play. It's a term for long intervals of slots where you have some certainty of chain growth from the honest participants and some guarantee over the proportion of blocks that originate from honest participants in that time frame. And then you can safely update the system in between. And then defining how long that epoch has to be is a very nuanced research question. And that's where the majority of the analysis of these security frameworks has gone into, and securing these protocols against what's called long-range attacks. In proof of stake, you have this added nuance of the adversary has this extra degree of freedom to extend whatever blockchain it sees fit. It doesn't have to devote its resources to just one chain, as was the case in proof of work. So since it can actually bias chains and use its own eligibilities, its kind of local leader elections to extend any chain that it desires, you have to parameterize the chain growth of the system in a new way. And in the Ouroboros line of research, they use these quantities called reach and margin to parameterize the adversary's viability in constructing these whatever blockchain that it controls. So it's a way of filtering chains as well. There's only two chains of interest that maximize these quantities that I'm referring to. And they're kind of constrained by honest activity at the same time. So it's a very nuanced subject, and the paper I brought up a little bit earlier called the combinatorics of longest chain rule does an exhaustive analysis of this. Uh, the degree of power that an adversary has to fork the network with this added degree of freedom. And in principle, that's the kind of foundation of where this forkable strings analysis and the quantities of reach and margin kind of stem from. So these are kind of abstract techniques that are used to make predictions about settlement properties, like the length of epochs that are safe. All of these kind of quantities are interwoven and intertwined in a security model that's in a systematic series of proofs that represent just a monument of research effort, which really drives me. That's really exciting to be a part of and try and apply my own skills. And
I was wondering, yeah, what is like, you know, it's heavy. It's heavy stuff. Trying to take it all in. So, what is like a day look like for you as director of research? How much of your day is spent on thinking about just this? What part of your day is do you need to interact with the rest of the team and catch them up? What part of your day is you need to read? You need to be on the latest edge of research. What part of that is answering emails?
my days are mostly reading research articles and trying to extend our own analysis with Taktikos. I'm also interested in key evolving schemes, which there's a particular scheme that we use on our platform. It's called the MMM construction. It's like secure, efficient, forward secure signatures. So that's another project I'm working on. But our research team is kind of concerned with uh, being able to make predictions about chain growth with this Taktikos modification that we've introduced, which is no small task. We had to devise our own Markov chain based framework to actually do that because we're really in the weeds here. This is novel kind of research space. Um, so the other thing is, um, devising a security proof, a systematic security proof, and what that actually looks like, and adapting our techniques to some of the techniques, like I referred to, reach and margin, these quantities that uh, kind of define the adversary's power in a given time based on what blocks they have available to them. Um, Generalizing it, and I do simulation research as well. And it was just kind of my favorite approach, but simulation should inform the analysis that takes place as well. So it's an informed approach to kind of deriving these security properties as time goes on. Lately, I've been reading this article called pull it up, "Practical Setup Bounds for Longest Chain Consensus," and it's the first quantitative kind of probabilities of settlement for Ouroboros prowess. And the techniques deployed there are really interesting, but it's still a rigorous analysis and takes time to digest. So we've been slowly working through that paper. Sorry for my background noises. I'm
It's
getting a
okay.
lot of
Those are all the
notifications
new
here.
those are all the new research papers coming in, and you're falling behind during this interview.
Yeah, right. Oh my God, this is crazy.
All right, we're gonna start wrapping up. Have we identified the area that you would like others in the space to pay a little more attention to in helps of your own research, in peer reviewing the things that Topple's working on? What would you pinpoint that kind of thing as like a topic area?
um, I would ask them to try and think of ways to innovate and modify these protocols and think about the security implications. Um, Tacticos kind of stemmed from just an idea I had and snowballed from there. Um, but I I was just experimenting with a test net that I implemented and was kind of playing around with. and it was just a simple rule change in the code. It was very like quick to implement and simple to enforce at a protocol level, at a validation level. So simple ideas can lead and kind of have far-reaching consequences, especially in this space when it's still fledgling science and we're, you know, trying our best to kind of make sense of everything in the face of uh, the chaos of the world and all the kind of adversarial effects that we have to consider. Um, but uh, as a researcher, I just feel excited to be on the forefront of something and to have like an original idea and be able to pursue it. And I'm grateful every day to that's my day to day, you know.
Hell yeah.
But
No, yeah, that I mean that's one of the best things about being in working in this space on a daily basis is that you're necessarily at the edge, and then some of us, yourself, are bleeding new edges, and I can't. That type of thing is super exciting, and I think you said in one of your discussions, if I could find the quote, but it was like, uh, you know, it was a great way of putting it. It was basically like, well, when you're doing novel research, you have to ask your own questions and answer your own questions, and that can be, I'm sure, can be lonely, but that's just the nature of it. You're at the edge now. Uh, is there anybody else that is here to help answer some of these questions? Part of these podcasts is to bring awareness to some of those things, and so I think you put it beautifully when you said that.
thank you.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know, what would you say your friends and family still don't really understand about blockchain, or what's the thing that you feel like the common the common person uh, hasn't considered, and do they even need to consider it? Is all of this just going to fade into the background and run without us needing to know? What would you say to that?
I think the biggest misunderstanding about blockchain and tech in general is its kind of distributed nature and why it's designed the way it is, and why it why it kind of exists in the first place. People kind of just a lot of people see it as like an investment opportunity or a cash cow to kind of or a new trend in finance and economics. But the principle behind it is this resiliency of information sharing and information propagation. Um, and that's the importance of it. Of this, why we're using it. It's why we're interested in deploying new systems that are based on Web3 tech in general and distributed systems. And I kind of fell in love with the research field, but also um, am kind of careful about how I use it. I've not invested in crypto much. I'm not very experienced with it. Because maybe I'm just waiting to see how the market develops and how the space evolves over time. But I'm very interested in Topple's mission and making the best platform possible. And my role here is to kind of envision new possibilities and show that they're actually improvements and show that they're secure quantitatively. So that's kind of, I don't know, a lot of the quantitative analysis that goes into it and the, uh, hmm, well, I'd say it's lost on the broader community. It's so nuanced at this point that like a lot of people have a hard time understanding it. But I think it's important research because we don't want to lie to people, and we want people to be able to rely on the technology without you know having the wool pulled over their eyes. Um,
Yeah, I
so
imagine.
reliable systems, I think the reliability and the kind of scalability of these approaches that Web3 uses. That's something I wish there was more awareness of, and if everybody understood blockchain a little bit more, I think we'd all make more informed decisions as what we invest in and how we actually use it.
Well said. I don't imagine you uh, entertain much of the idea about speculation and having to enter into the conversation with the person that begins with those types of questions. It's just not the right place to start, and that's what I took away from your 5-part series. Was it's just here's distributed systems. What happens next? What is the way of thinking of those? So definitely, it's coming out of everything that you talk about. So much appreciated to the work you're doing there.
Thank you.
Um, what man, I have a million more questions. What, but on the more personal, just non-blockchain side of things, what do you how do you turn off on a Friday or on a weekend? Do you have any fun activities you like to do that's outside of blockchain, or at least something that invigorates new ideas about blockchain that's not directly research?
To clear my mind, I go climbing a lot. I'm into bouldering, which requires a lot of kind of dedication. I'd say it's like 90% training and 10% climbing. Some of the times it feels like,
Mm.
uh, but
Puzzles.
really
It's still a
puzzles.
lot of
Yeah, it's
puzzles.
like solving a puzzle with your whole body. It's a great feeling, and it allows kind of a different kind of focus. You feel really attuned with your mind body connection when you're doing it. Uh, so just nuanced balance and the technique that go into it. And it's kind of something I don't really communicate about it much. I just kind of learn from watching people and um, trying trying it myself. I've been doing it for the past like 5 years now, give or take. But I also I play piano and unwind that way. It's a form of self expression. The music scene here in Austin is really nice, so I've been appreciating that and going to open mics and things like that. Um, and just being outdoors. I got into paddleboarding last summer, which is kind of the Austin trend. I really appreciate. It's a good vantage point on the river of the Austin skyline and very relaxing outlet. But I'm looking forward to the warm summer so I can go back to doing it every weekend.
Absolutely. I love that. I didn't ask if you did you grow up in the Texas, Austin, Houston area, or
I
did you
did, yeah.
move?
I was actually born in Houston and spent some time in the Midwest in Michigan, and then came back for graduate school. And then I spent my childhood in Austin through the '90s, so I kind of feel nostalgic a lot of the time. It's
Yeah,
changed a lot since then, grown a lot since then, but yeah, I love it.
awesome, awesome. Hey, you know, we attempted in 1 hour to run the range of uh, some deep research in Taktikos, in Ouroboros Praus, in proof of stake, the assumptions made for distributed computing, a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Topple. I'd say we've done a really great job in this 1 hour, but we're definitely going to need a follow up part two. So can I ask for you now to come back when the time is right and we have another conversation to follow up on some of these things?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, much appreciated. Really great talking to you. I'm sure we will have more time to chat again. But for now, thanks for coming on our show, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.